So we want to switch gears and come back to Israel, because we're in the news like almost daily. And there's this talk about, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. This idea that the people that live in Israel, the Jews that live here, are occupiers. What's your response to that idea that the Jews have taken over the land that, quote unquote, belonged to the Arabs that were here?
I'd like to take apart what you said into two questions. And the first one will be much shorter, and if you would like to hear more about it, we can address it later. The chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is a genocidal chant, which basically translates into the Jews will all be dead or have transferred out, they'll be kicked out, they will not be here. And that connects very strongly to the fact, and it is a fact, anyone who wishes can look it up, that 800,000 Jews were displaced from the Arab countries from 1947 and onward. From the founding of the Jewish state in 1948, 800,000 Jews were expelled from the Arab countries. If you were to look at the demographics before 1947, there were 6,000 Jews in Lebanon. There were tens of thousands of Jews in Egypt. There were tens of thousands of Jews in Iran, and so on and so forth. Today, there are 3 Jews in Egypt. There are 0 Jews in Lebanon, and so on and so forth. The demographics don't lie. And if you reverse that and look at the Arab population, that in 1947, there were 100,000 Arabs in the territory between in the Gaza Strip, and there were about 1 million Arabs in the territory between the river and the sea. Mm-hmm. Right now, there are 2 million Arabs in the Gaza Strip, and there are about 4.3 million Arabs between the river and the sea. So, if we talk about transfers and genocides, then the Arab population has grown dramatically, where in this area, in Israel, between the river and the sea, whereas the Jewish population in Arab nations, or even in Arab-controlled places, such as the Gaza Strip, has become extinct. So while many of those in protests and many people who advocate that Israel is performing genocide might be saying those slogans, but the truth is that the reverse has been true and is true. The Jews have had their numbers reduced to 0 in the country that they were rightful and lawful citizens, and the Arabs not only have their numbers grown, but they have fully equal rights in Israel. And if you ask them, the majority of them would rather live in Israel than any other country in the Middle East, and certainly more than being under the control of the Palestinian Authority. Not only that, but did you know that just a few years ago, speaking of equal rights, an Arab judge sentenced the Israeli president to jail? Now, why do not most people not know that? Because it doesn't matter that he was an Arab. And it doesn't matter that the president wasn't. The judge sentenced a criminal to jail. Not an Arab judge, not a Jewish president. In Israel, there is no apartheid. The Arabs have full and equal rights. And
before you go on, because I want you to answer the question about the occupation thing. We also hear.
I will answer. Good. Absolutely. But I just wanted to once again say that the chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is a chant of we want to transform the current situation into such that the quote unquote Palestinians, and we can talk about that later as well, the Arab tribes that call themselves Palestinians would like to control this land in its entirety and have zero Jews here. They would like an apartheid state of only Arabs and to perform genocide on the Jews, which is what we in fact experienced on October 7th. Now, to answer the second part of your question, after the short answer of the first part that you didn't even realize was a question, in 1947, when the British decided that their empire was crumbling and the cost of being here was too high for them because of the Arab violence and the Jewish resistance to their plans, during that time, the world was going through a phase of decolonization. In many, many countries in Africa and in the Middle East and Far East Asia, countries were taken off the yoke of the colonial powers, be it France and Britain mostly.
India was one of those examples, yes. India was one of those places where they got independence, yes.
Yes, correct. India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, of course, all of the Middle Eastern and African countries that were hobbled together through the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where a map was spread out on a table in Europe, a ruler was pulled out from a drawer, and the land was chopped up into pieces with no regard to the ethnic peoples living there. But nevertheless, the world was experiencing a decolonization, and as a result, there was a feeling by some in the world that the Jews were, especially those coming from war-torn Europe after the Holocaust, were a proxy of the colonial powers, were a way for the colonial powers, specifically Britain, to keep a foothold in what was known as Israeli-Palestinian, the Palestine Mandate, the area which became Jordan and became Israel and the Gaza Strip and West Bank. And that feeling of Israel being a Western nationality that was a proxy of the United Kingdoms is what gave weight, is what led to that feeling of the colonialization continuing. Additionally, many of the Jews came from Europe to Israel, similar to what the great powers did in the previous 300 to 500 years. The Dutch, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and so on came from Europe, went all over the world, and laid claim to those countries. So, with that in mind, it was a frame of reference that was familiar to the natives here. But the truth is, of course, that up until the 7th century, there were no Muslims in Israel because there were no Muslims, of course.
There's no such thing.
That, in fact, from the year 1800 BC, when Abraham first came here, and continuing to 1000 BC, when King David was here, and his capital was Jerusalem, and in 150 BC, when the Hasmonean dynasty was here, the Jews have been in Israel for a very long time.
So the short answer...
No, I don't want the short answer.
The short answer is that Israel, or the Jewish people of the present day, are not really occupying because they did not do the same things that Germany and France and England did to these different places around the world in terms of exploitation and colonizing. They're coming back to their home. That's what you're trying to say.
That is something I'm trying to say, correct? Not only that, but they aren't taking the resources from the land they're occupying and taking it elsewhere, such as all the colonial powers did. Taking the gold, taking the diamonds, taking the people as slaves. Israel is developing the country and making the desert bloom and developing technologies and improving the lives of everyone living here.
So the term occupier or occupation is a misnomer. It's not our actual it's not an accurate term.
Of course, it's completely irrelevant to this place. Not only that, but if you wish to look at any of the places where there were occupations or colonials, for example, let's take the United Kingdom and India. When the United Kingdom came to India, if their archaeologists were to come and examine the interesting artifacts and relics of the past, I don't think they would find anything from 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago in English.
Mhm.
But here in Israel, in the Jewish land, the archaeologists, when they dig up the past, when they look at history, can you guess what language they find here? They find Hebrew. They find the same language that I speak today. Well, not right now to you,
Exactly.
but that I speak and spoke and studied. And when I studied in the Hebrew University, it was in Hebrew. And this is not a new language that came to the land. This was the language that was spoken here for 4,000 years.
Thank you. So the next question I was going to ask you had to do with Jewish settlements, but I'll hold that question off because I want to ask, there's this thing circulating, even President Biden mentioned this about a two-state solution. Could you answer a little bit to what is this idea about a two-state solution, and is it even viable to think about a two-state solution given what we've just already talked about?
The two-state solution is an idea that originated in 1917 when the foreign secretary of the British Empire, Lord Balfour, wrote a letter to the Jewish community where he stated that Israel shall be the homeland of the Jewish people. Is when the first internationally known figure stated the intention of allowing the Jewish people to return to what was essentially their historic homeland, and be given the right, quote unquote, be given the right to exist in their homeland. And from that, even before that, for the 50 years prior, the Jewish Zionist movement started preparing for that moment and onward by building the facilities that are needed, the governing bodies that are needed in order to run a country. And as the years continued, this idea took further shape. I'm currently just talking about the Jewish homeland. And in 1947, when the British Mandate declared its intention to end, then the United Nations suggested that this land be divided between the two ethnic groups that were currently living here, the Jews and the Arab tribes. And that was a suggestion that was readily accepted by the Jews and vehemently opposed by the Arabs. Because, as we mentioned earlier, they would like from the river to the sea, Palestine to be free. They want it all. They don't like to share their toys. And as a result, immediately they started aggression, violence, and a war against Israel, starting in 1947 by the Arabs living in Israel.
But before that, there were some conflicts that happened.
Absolutely. In 1920, there were pogroms that had gone. In 1936, there was what's known as the Arab Revolt, led by the Nazi Mufti of Jerusalem against the British Empire. And when I say Nazi, I'm not just using hyperbole. He was in fact a Nazi, a very good friend of Adolf Hitler, who was, along with Hitler, planning the defeat of the British Empire in Palestine, which would then be followed by concentration camps similar to Europe that would be run by the Arabs here and the German Nazis. So this is not hyperbole. He was a Nazi. But anyway, that's not surprising considering, again, October 7th, we've seen exactly what the interests and goals of our Gazan cousins and other Arab neighbors are. But going back to your question, that was the first time that the quote partition plan came up in 1947, and it sparked the War of Independence, which started in 1947, not 48,
Right.
with the Arabs living in Israel attacking the Jews living in Israel. In 1948, a year later, the Jews declared their independence by David Ben-Gurion declaring the founding of the State of Israel. And one day later, 7 Arab countries invaded Israel. Now, there's a lot to be said about that war and how it affected the situation and what happened to the Arabs living in Israel, but that wasn't your question.
That was not.
But that is once again the continuation. Then again, in 1993, the idea of a two-state solution came up once again, this time by the Americans. In 1947, it was the British. In 1948, it was the UN. In 1993, it was the Americans, who all thought it would be a wonderful idea to have 2 countries, one for Jews and one for Arabs. I might point out once again, when talking about apartheid states, that the Jewish country also would have 25% or so of it be Arab, and the Arab country would have 0% of it be Jews, which we clearly can see how terrible and how genocidal and apartheid the Jewish state is, with all of its many equal rights Arabs, as opposed to the Arab states with all of its 0 Jews. But, let's put that aside.
So the one
for
you're talking
now.
about in 93, is that the Oslo Accords?
The 93 was indeed the Oslo Accords that were signed by Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, with Bill Clinton in between them. And that started the process towards a two-state solution, quote unquote, with the roadmap to peace. That was continued because there were still some disagreement points, such as the refugees, which is a whole other topic. And Jerusalem being the capital of which country. And as a result, in 2000, and again in 2003, and again in 2008, more attempts were made to push forward and progress the idea of a two-state solution. Ehud Barak, the failed prime minister of Israel.
Tell us how you really feel.
No, don't hold back.
Yes, Adrian, go ahead.
The prime minister of Israel offered 99.3% of the land that the Palestinians, again, I use the term Palestinians, but what I mean is Arab tribes who, for reasons that we can go into later, call themselves Palestinians. But these tribes wanted X amount of land, and Ehud Barak offered them 99.3% of the land they wanted. And as famously coined, and I'll use the phrase now, the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. They always reject these suggested two-state solutions because they don't want a two-state solution. Because, as I said in my very first answer, it's not about land. It's about ideology, and it's about theology. It's not about land. 99.3 wasn't enough for them.
So, in your mind, this idea is a failed concept about two-state solution.
In my mind, the idea was a failed concept from the start because it was never about land. But more than that, it's a failed concept because the people on the other side of the table don't want peace. They want us all dead. They don't want two states. In their mind, the two-state solution is just a way for them to get more weapons, more land, more power, more strength to arm themselves and then destroy us. As we saw on October 7th, in the period leading up to it, Israel's political and army minds failed miserably because they were lulled into the conception that the Hamas wants to have a truce, would like to improve the economic situation in the Gaza Strip, receive money, and as a result will stay out of the violence, will stay out of the Islamic Jihad's violence, which is another terrorist organization. And instead would like to find a way to coincide and live side by side. When in fact, we now know that they've been planning this massacre for well over 2 years, and anything that they did in the meantime was just fooling us. And that is the same with the Arabs living in Judea and Samaria, in Ramle, with the PLO, with Abu Mazen, Abbas. He too is cheering on and encouraging what happened on October 7th. He too is indoctrinating the children to grow up hating Israel. He too is paying the Hamas $2 billion a year. He too is paying salaries to the prisoners, especially the terrorists, and the more damage and harm and casualties they have caused, the higher their salary. Just because they didn't perform the massacre on October 7th doesn't mean they wish they had it. We don't have a partner for peace. The two-state solution is a ploy to strengthen the Arabs in their desires to exterminate us.
So our viewers listening to that will probably be saying, well, this is a very pessimistic outlook. What does the future hold? So this is the question. What does the future hold for the Arabs living here, for the Jews living here, if that's the scenario? What does the future hold?
Well,
in your mind?
First of all, the future has to include a demilitarization of those that wish to harm us, whether it's a crime syndicate or whether it's a terrorist organization, whether it's drug dealers, whether it's human traffickers. They need to be dealt with. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, one can make a large distinction between an organization of tens of thousands of fighters that are bent on our destruction and an organization of 50, 100, 200 criminals. But the result, the goal should be the same: to de-weaponize them, to remove them from society, be it via prison systems or executions, or possibly removing them to other countries. But you know what?
Who wants them?
No one wants them.
So that's not an option.
You see, there's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. There's 57 Muslim countries. There's 21 Arab countries. And you know how many refugees they've offered to take in from this current conflict? I'll tell you. 0. All of their support, all of their talk, all of their lip service is just that. They have offered to take in, now I'm not saying take in 2 million Palestinian refugees from the Gaza Strip. Don't even take 1 million. Heck, not even 100,000. But 0? That just shows us exactly how much they care. Which, of course, we see over and over when Arabs or Palestinians or refugees are slaughtered throughout the world, like in Syria. No one bats an eye. No one cares. But when something happens in Israel, the whole world gets up in arms. There's protests all over the campuses in the West. I wonder if any of those protesting in the universities in the West are aware of the fact that Pakistan is removing 1.7 million Afghans from its country. This is happening now as we speak. 1.7 million refugees are being created. Afghanis being kicked out of Pakistan. I wonder how many protests there are around the world for that grave injustice.
So, if I hear you correctly, Israel needs to get a little more aggressive in terms of dealing with the implements of violence, the institutions that foment this violence. But then you come up with this thing about ideology. How do you deal with, as they said in the Ben-Hur movie, how do you defeat an idea? The idea is we want the Jews gone. We take away the weapons, we take away the rockets, whatever it is. We neutralize Hezbollah, we neutralize Hamas. There's still the hatred that is going to be there for the Jews. So how do we fight that?
I'm going to separate the answer into 3 parts. The first part is that you can't. Just like there's the Nazi ideology is still around, you cannot make an idea disappear. But you can limit it. You can control it. Just like the Nazi idea, which is still around, is considerably weaker and controlled and seen as a fringe and extreme, as opposed to the 1930s and 40s, when it was very powerful and influenced the world to tragic results. But can you defeat an idea? The answer is no, but you can control it.
Okay. Second.
The second part is that it will probably take a generation or two or three before the brainwashed, indoctrinated Arabs living between the river and the sea will be freed from their brainwashing. Right now, in kindergartens, in schools, and summer camps that are run by the Palestinian Authority, that their curriculum is produced by the Palestinian Authority. It's all about hating Jews and killing Jews, and that the Jews victimized us, and so on and so forth. And of course, that has to change. And until that changes, we won't see any reduction in these violent ideas.
Okay.
So the first step would be, well, not the first step, but one critical and necessary step would be to control, change the indoctrination and brainwashing of the civilian population. The mosques in the Palestinian Authority run mosques are broadcasting what happened in Gaza in a positive light. These massacres are seen as a positive thing. The beheading of babies is seen as a positive thing by our partners for peace. And of course, the third and final part of the answer is that you started by saying that I gave a pessimistic outlook on the future, and I agree. I'm in this regard, I'm a pessimist. In most other regards in my life, in most other spheres, I'm an optimist. But in regard to the future of the Israel-Arab conflict, I'm a pessimist, because the things that we're doing now and the things that we should have been doing for the last 75 years, for example, arresting people that are encouraging terrorist acts, firing people that are encouraging terrorist acts, and by terrorist acts I am referring to the slaughter of innocent babies and everything else that happened on October 7th. The quick response to violence that was ignored for decades, such as Molotov cocktails being thrown, shots being fired at passerbys, and so on and so forth. In the last months, we have started responding, I would say not even strong enough, but more than we have in the previous decades. And I'm pessimistic because I don't think that will last. I think that it's because of the emotions of October 7th that now we're responding the way we are, and the way we should have been responding all along to unacceptable acts that strengthen violence and death. And I hope and pray that the Israeli public and the Israeli leadership has had a switch in their mindset and will keep doing and strengthen these actions. For decades now, we've seen the Bedouins in the south running rampant all over the Negev desert, going into army training areas and army bases, taking whatever they want, shooting at the soldiers, and the soldiers are told not to shoot back because it'll cause them legal issues. For decades, we've seen the criminals, whether they're Jewish or Arab, acting in ways that no Western civilized society would accept, and it continues and it is ignored. And for decades, we've seen that 80% of murders in Israel are committed by 20% of the population. You can guess which. And that too has been ignored because of tradition and culture and wokeism. And these are things that I pray will change, but I'm pessimistic about it. I expect that in a few months, our short memory and our amnesia will cause us to go back to wanting Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, and his PA to control the Gaza Strip, because we want to go back to normal, and we will want everything to go back so that we can live our cozy lives on comfy couches like the one I'm sitting on now and forget what happened on October 7th. We said never again. We said that in the 40s, and it happened again.
So we're bringing this to a close. Yes, it looks dark and kind of hopeless in a way, but the majority of the people listening to this interview today are believers in Jesus or Yeshua. And is there a message you could give to them that would be more, I don't want to say upbeat, but is there something they can do? Let's put it that way. Are there things that they can do to help us here in the land move towards a better future? Maybe that's a very broad question, but are there things that they can do as they're listening, as they've been thinking about this and going, oh no, are there things they can do now and continue to do that might help to push Israel into a better future than you've already explained?
For evil to triumph, all that needs to happen is for good men to do nothing.
Yeah, I remember someone saying that.
And that is what is mostly happens all along. Even the very powerful Israel advocate Bridget Gabriel, who is of, I believe, Lebanese descent, but in any case, Middle Eastern, says that it's not the quiet majority that matters, but the vocal minority when it comes to the extremism of Muslims. Well, I might beg to differ on her, because I think the, quote, quiet majority is complicit in this matter. They voted the Hamas in, they support them, they encourage them. It's not that terrorism is caused because they're poor, but they're poor because of terrorism. The Hamas is the richest terrorist organization in the world. Khaled Mashal is sitting on $5 billion, and their other leaders have quite a bit themselves. The Hamas has...
And where is all this money coming from, by the way?
All this money, very good question. The Palestinians, again, quote unquote, the Arabs living here are the highest receiving people, ethnic group in the world. More than any other people group, they receive funds from the United Nations, from the European Union, from the United States, from everywhere. The funds that they receive is more than any other people group in the world. And they could use that money for infrastructure, for schools, for medical needs, but instead they use it for bunkers, for tunnels, for rockets. And that is why the Palestinian people suffer.
So what can believers do back?
But to answer your question, not just believers, not just Christians, not just for those who follow Jesus and Yeshua, Jesus known as Yeshua. They're not separate people.
Wait a minute.
But not just them, but every democracy-loving, freedom-loving, civilized, equal-loving person, every Western, everyone who loves life needs to support Israel, needs to go out and demonstrate, needs to write their congressmen, needs to write their leaders, needs to put up an Israeli flag on their house or on their car. I know that sounds strange because we're all expected to be loyal to our countries. And if you're in France or the Netherlands or Canada or the United States, you'd have a flag of your own country. But this battle is a battle for our way of life, This battle is not going to end here. We spoke about it in the beginning.
Mhm.
The Muslims, the jihadists, the terrorists are coming for you next. They're coming for the West. They're already there. They're already in the West. Somewhere between 8 and 13% of the French population is Muslim at this point. There's thousands of Muslims coming every day into Europe. This is a battle for life and for our way of life.
Thank you, Daniel. So there it is. We have, I think, laid out before you what the situation here is in Israel and the ongoing conflict. But as Daniel closed out, he says that you, the audience, have to make a choice. You have to decide if you're going to stand on the side of right or the side which is good or the side of evil and wrong. And your stand will help amazingly in ways that you can't imagine. There might be some risk to this. There was a story of this deli or a diner owner in New York who put up pictures of the captives that were taken, and we're still praying for their release. People saw that and said, "We don't want to know about this," and they stopped coming to his diner. But he's not Jewish, but he felt it was the right thing to do, to stand up for this. And so what happened is many Jewish people decided to come to encourage his business, bolster his business in his diner work. And it might cost you something to stand up, but it's better to do it now. You know, they said they came for the communists, and I didn't speak up. They came for the socialists, I didn't speak up. They came for the gypsies, and so on and so on. And when they came for me, there was no one to speak up. So if we speak up now, we will have somebody to speak up for us in the end. So we thank you for your time. We hope this has been edifying to you, and God bless.